In October 2020, we made history at the Southmorton Boxing Club by staging the world's first behind-closed-doors white-collar boxing show. We got over 10,000 views on the night across 103 countries. Now we're bringing the live rumble back, bigger and better than before. Follow the fighters in the build-up and vote on the night for your favourites. See all the thrills, spills and skills from the best in white-collar boxing, live and free at the KO Cup.
Okay, Peter, so today I wanted to talk about an interesting development that came up this weekend to do with the heavyweight scene and really what we've been talking about for ages. Obviously, we're waiting for the big Fury Joshua announcement. We're hoping that's going to come later in the week or the week after. It looks like, the Middle East, Saudi is the leading contender to land that fight. But, for a long time, Peter, we've been talking about the three kings, and we talked about Joshua, Fury and Wilder and settling their fights. And as we know, in March last year, Fury put in a totally dominant performance against Wilder, beat him up for 8 rounds, stopped him in 8 rounds, and Mark Breland threw the towel in round 8, and that's how that fight ended. And then we've been waiting to see what happens after that. We didn't necessarily disqualify Wilder for that because there was supposed to be a third fight that was all supposed to be contracted. And obviously we thought Wilder's got a lot more to give, and will AJ be able to cope with Wilder? It was all part of the mix. We wanted to see who was going to come out on top out of these three. And then we did the where's Wilder thing. We talked about the three kings, what's happening with Wilder, why isn't he coming back? And we had very strange emanations from the Wilder camp. We had all the excuses, starting off with the suit being too heavy. And as you know, Breland was sacked straight after the fight for throwing in the towel. Then there was talk about Fury's gloves being tampered with, talks about Wilder's water being tampered with, all these excuses. And all this talk about this evidence will come out, this evidence will come out. We have evidence that all these things have happened and nothing comes out. And then apparently when the 6-month contractual period for Wilder to enforce his rematch with Fury expired, then Wilder started saying, oh, actually, I want a third match, when Fury had moved on and was talking with Joshua and so on. So what is happening with Wilder? Now, the thing is, we never had any confirmation because we had these wild accusations coming out of the camp, but nothing actually happening. And then, really interesting this weekend, on Saturday, Mark Breland, who was in Wilder's corner and threw that towel in, did an interview with The Fight Is Right, run by two friends of mine, Tunde Ajay and Spencer Fearon. Now, Spencer Fearon's a good friend of mine. Spencer has one of the biggest address books in boxing. I mean, he probably, maybe not as big as Eddie Hearn's, but not far off behind. So Spencer can kind of get hold of anyone in boxing, and he got this interview with Breland, who for the first time broke his silence and talks about what happened in the Wilder camp and what he sees happening going forward. So it's a fascinating interview. And for anybody that doesn't know, just to recap who Mark Breland is, Mark Breland was the co-trainer of Deontay Wilder right from when he turned over from the amateurs. He came in to assist Jay Diaz, who has been, Wilder's head trainer. Mark Breland was brought in to bring in the experience because Mark Breland's resume is unbelievable. I mean, 5 times Golden Glove champions. To put that in perspective, Sugar Ray Robinson won 4 Golden Gloves championships. So, Mark Breland won 5. So, all-time record with that. He was part of that amazing 1984 Olympic team and won gold at the 1984 Olympics. Then he went on to become 2 times welterweight champion of the world. So, a breadth of experience, superlative boxer, incredible experience, incredible fighter. And he brought that to the Wilder camp, which, to be honest, they needed. Now, the relationship seemed to be fine all the way up until the Fury fight. Breland, quite rightly in my opinion, with that very wise head in boxing, threw the towel in when he thought that Wilder was just, a few punches away from getting seriously hurt and was taking a bad beating. He was immediately sacked by Wilder, who said that he was on the verge of some sort of amazing comeback, which I think everybody outside of Wilder's ego knew was just fantasy. Then he was reinstated, then he was sacked again, and then some nasty stuff started to come out. They started to say, look, the reason we sacked him again is we think that Breland tampered with Wilder's water, and drugged Wilder somehow so that his legs went during the fight. So, not only was the man unceremoniously sacked twice, he was then slandered. And, he's a very dignified guy, he's a guy, a man of great integrity. So, it was very unfair, but he didn't actually say anything. He didn't talk about, this until this weekend. So he spoke to Spencer and Tunde, and it was a fascinating insight. Again, you can't underline, how respectful this man is, the integrity of the man, and then obviously the experiences we've talked about. But he was quite scathing. There was some talk, the issues were tackled directly. For example, the issue of Fury's gloves. Does he think Fury's gloves were loaded? He said absolutely no way. They went through, as you know, that somebody from the opposing camp has to go and watch the fighters' hands be wrapped, as well as state commissioners before the fight. So, you're watching the hands wrapped, taped, and the gloves go on. Now, it turns out Jay Diaz, the co-trainer, was in the dressing room with Fury watching that taping going on. So really, if there was any sort of indication of foul play in the glove tampering, why didn't Jay Diaz pick up on it? As Breland said, although he did use that as a bit of a dig, he said, look, Jay Diaz, what Jay Diaz knows about boxing, they probably could have put a plaster cast in there and he wouldn't have noticed. So there was also a little dig there, but he said, look, that was out of my control. The water tampering, he said, watch the tape, I'm nowhere near the water. And he was obviously quite hurt by this as well, because he said, look, it's not how I operate. If you win, I win. That's what it's all about, And like I say, for a man with that integrity to be accused of that, I think is terribly unfair. So it was quite dismissive as well. When asked about a third Fury fight, this was the sort of real denouement. He said, he's done. Wilder is done. And he will never beat Fury anyway. So that was a really interesting insight. He said, Wilder is done. And he said, and I'm done with him. So he doesn't obviously think, and then he went on to elaborate a little bit about that. He said, when you take a loss, you've got to take a loss. That's what happens in life. That's what happens in boxing. You take your loss. You don't blame everyone else. You just take your loss, you move on, and you come back. Incidentally, as Breland has done, like I said, two-time, welterweight champion of the world, took his loss, came back and won the title back again. So he was quite dismissive of Wilder and seemed to say that he just couldn't cope with the loss, surround himself with yes men, as we suspected was the case. And doesn't seem to be on any sort of trail towards coming back anytime soon. There was a few interesting insights as well into the Wilder camp. He said, he doesn't skip, he doesn't hit the heavy bag, he doesn't hit the speed ball. He said all he's got is power. All he's got is his power. He completely relies on that. And he said, if he does come back, let's see how far that will take him. And I think within those words was the summarisation that he doesn't expect it to take him very far. So in Mark Breland's view, it seems that Wilder is done. So a very interesting insight. And if that is the case, then obviously we do have the final settlement of all this really in the Joshua Fury fight coming up, hopefully in a few weeks' time. So we'll finally find out who's going to be number one, who's going to be on top. It looks like Wilder, as we suspected, is kind of sidelined by his own ego, unfortunately. The other thing Breland said, which was very interesting, he was asked to give an insight into what he thought about the Fury-AJ fight. Now, his opinion was that Fury wins. He said Fury is amazing at mind games. He plays that brilliantly. I suppose we knew that, but he's been directly in the camp watching the effect it has on the fighter. And he said Fury's very good at getting inside people's heads. He also criticised AJ. He said he doesn't have a jab. He should have used a strong jab against Ruiz. Doesn't use his jab effectively and doesn't move enough. So, he was very much plumping on Fury's side for the AJ Fury fight. So, a fascinating insight from a very accomplished and very dignified man, on The Fight Is Right with Spencer Fear and Tunde Ajayi. So go on YouTube and check that out if you want to see that interview. A great insight. But it kind of seems to wrap up the Wilder story. I'm sure it's not over. I'm sure there will be some sort of comeback, but it was an interesting insight from somebody who really knows as to what's going on with the man. So I think we kind of have to put Wilder at one side until he actually does something now and, focus on what's going to happen with Fury Joshua. So another little development, maybe not the development we wanted to settle this. We wanted Wilder to come back and see what he had. But at the moment, it doesn't look like he's going anywhere fast.